I'm the leader of Generational Gap. This project was done by me, Allison Kung, Gina and Leah Park, Lauren Shin, and Ali Yim.
So to start off, we have parenting styles between the first and the 1.5 generation. Okay, so first generation is when the first member of a family gains citizenship or permanent residence outside of their home country.
The 1.5 generation are children of first-gen immigrants who moved to a new country before or during their early teens, and this is typically around ages 6 through 12. The second generation are children of the 1.5 immigrants, and they automatically have citizenship.
So here are some of the parenting styles of the first generation. So first we have higher expectations for education, which means that they expect their children to get into schools such as Ivy Leagues, and they expect their children to get into these schools regardless of financial situation. They also have an authoritarian parenting style, or they use negative reinforcement, and that means that they try to avoid a certain thing in a situation to increase a desired behavior. So an example of this is such as you try to wake up before your alarm to avoid the annoying sound of your alarm. Next, first generation parents have a hands-off approach or a detached parenting style, and some factors include language barriers and just cultural distances or just lack of time spent in general with their children. And finally, we have white-collar careers, which are careers that are usually well-known in the area that they might live in, and parents have the mindset that without a white-collar career, their children won't be as successful. They also try to avoid not using inexperienced labor work, which means they try to avoid work that doesn't require much experience or training to do.
So next is a 1.5 generation, and they are influenced by the first gen in some aspects. And an example of this is that they tend to have expectations for the children to continue their education into college, but they are more understanding based on their personal financial situation and will accept state colleges. In contrast to the first gen, the 1.5 gen also tends to use an authoritative style over an authoritarian style, and this means that they use positive encouragement while asserting themselves as the parent and are influenced by mainstream American culture such as education. They also take on a hands-on approach to their child's life, and this is due to factors such as English fluency, cultural and socioeconomic resources, and just overall being more interested in a child's activities and interests. They also want their children to pick and assume a role that best fits their talent, aptitude, and interests. So this means a wider range of careers, since it does extend to blue-collar careers, and these are jobs such as jobs like manufacturing and construction work.
This is the cultural differences in Korean generations. Koreans born in America are influenced by both Korean and American culture, while first-generation Koreans are influenced by only Korean culture since they're born and raised in Korea. This causes Korean to be spoken a lot more between first-generation Koreans compared to 1.5 to third-generation Koreans who speak little to no Korean and instead choose to speak English. This is an example of how those born in America see Korean culture as less important or unnecessary since it's not needed to live in America. Culture and language go hand in hand. Speaking a language gives you a connection to people and cultures that also speak that language. When speaking and learning two different languages, in this case Korean and English, there's a clash or a confusion that happens when deciding how important Korean culture is compared to American culture to them. Cultural identity really ties into this because there's a push and pull relationship when deciding between getting closer or being more connected to American culture or Korean culture. Since language is so closely bonded with culture, this applies to 1.5 generation Koreans choosing to usually speak English over Korean.
What are the differences in cultural understanding between first generation and 1.5 generation? First generation Koreans don't have values other than South Korean values since they're living in Korea and only being influenced by their Korean parents. 1.5 generation Koreans are influenced not only with Korean values but also with American values and culture. 1.5 generation Koreans have a loss for the Korean culture and have to sort out their identity while simultaneously being pressured to satisfy the expectations their parents have set for the cultural understanding of their root. This is taken from an article written by Portis and Rombot. When their children have to begin to abandon their native language and culture, they feel a need to pressure their children to retain a strong connection to their cultural roots. This shows how 1.5 generation Koreans do not have exactly the same amount of understanding of their Korean roots as their first generation parents who were born in Korea.
Collectivists see a strong importance in group work and community, while individualists act and behave with self-interest and independence in mind. Stated from an article by On, it is written that in contrast to individualistic cultures of the Western Hemisphere, Koreans develop a sense of identity through relationships made in their web of social connections. By being born in Korea, first-generation Koreans have a more collectivistic culture or understanding when it comes to their actions, while 1.5 generation Koreans are born in the U.S., which has an individualistic culture. Growing up in the U.S. with different values coming from an individualistic culture, the U.S., and a collectivistic culture, Korea, can be quite confusing. This connects to how 1.5 generation Koreans are conflicted between American culture and Korean culture.
Adding on to this, the morals and values of Korean culture date back to as far as the 6th century, specifically the Confucius teachings. Each son has a debt from his early years that has to be repaid. The concept of filial piety originated from the Chinese philosopher Confucius and teaches sacrifice, respect, and endurance towards elders, primarily affecting 1.5 generation. It is heavily indented in Korean culture, so we can see that reflected through our traditions and religion. In this graph, a survey was done where Koreans in their 50s and 20s were asked whether they agreed with the filial contract duty. So about 80% of Koreans in their 50s agreed with the filial contract duty, while only 64.7% of Koreans in their 20s agreed. This is because there's no strong concept of filial piety in Western culture. So the 1.5 generation, specifically millennials, are raised in an environment where self-growth is prioritized over obligation towards elders. Due to this, almost 20% of elderly Koreans are reported to be living alone, and 51.1% of elderly abuse in Korea were reported to be from the victims' children.
Finally, we have assimilation and acculturation. Assimilation is a process where a minority group takes on the behaviors, values, and beliefs of a majority group. This can be completely or partially. And acculturation is a process of learning and incorporating those values, their language, mannerisms, and beliefs of the new country that the immigrant is going to be living in. So regarding mental health, because of the stress that the immigrants have to deal with by embracing and integrating into American standards, they are likely to engage in delinquent activity. More than any other immigrant group, Korean Americans report the highest levels of stress related to acculturation. And for ethnic identity, these Korean immigrants are conflicted about how they're going to identify themselves. They don't know if they're Korean American, American, or Korean. And then regarding assimilation, there are several factors that play into the degree of this assimilation. There is generational status, self-ethnic identification, interactions, involvement, beliefs and customs of their cultural origin, overall preservation of a fundamental sense of self, and finally, community. To elaborate on community, If one is more involved in their Korean culture, like a Korean school or a Korean church, it is proven that there will be a less degree of assimilation. Moving on to acculturation, in the 1.5 generations, and especially in the second generations and later, acculturation is practically unavoidable, and this is due to cultural conflicts between generations as mentioned in parenting styles. Next are elements, which includes behavioral elements, which is one's behavior and knowledge of their majority culture. And then there are psychological elements, which includes one's cultural values, attitudes, their ethnic identity, and affiliation with their culture. And to wrap up assimilation and acculturation, we have an example of cultural conflict. In the quote, it says, "And she doesn't get disciplined if she gets like an F or a D on her test or grade." This is a quote from a Korean mother, and she is saying how she doesn't understand the parenting styles of an American mother. The child of this Korean immigrant mother will have to deal with acculturation since they are exposed to both views. Overall, all of these subtopics are factors and play into the degree of disparity between each generation. Thank you.